Could New York Jets wide receiver Alan Lazard be on his way out of town? And could a few names of guys who were on the roster be here for longer than anticipated? Or are we going to see a bunch of previous year's draft picks sent packing once the year starts? I'm Glenn Norton with Jet Nation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. Joined today by another JetNation.com contributor, Mr. Scott Mitchell, making his first appearance on the show. How we doing, Scott?
I'm doing very good. I'm trying to be excited for the Jets draft class. I am pretty excited for the Jets draft class. It's towards the end of the rounds that it got a little hairy, but not bad, not bad. So I'm like cautiously optimistic for the upcoming season, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, well, that's another question conversation. Maybe we'll touch on that, but I can't tell. I can't get the pulse of the fan base right now. I see some people talking about how excited they are, but I feel like an awful lot of people are just like, "Yeah, show me." Like I'm too many years of getting excited to have it lead to nothing, to finding ways to screw everything up. And I don't know. Maybe it's just me. You can say, "Oh, Glenn, you're a million miles away in England," but listen, the past few years, the Rodgers years, and other years, I can't remember the last time I felt this kind of like I can't get fired up. Like there's certain aspects, certain things that do it for me, but as a whole, I think this team's got a lot to overcome to be competitive, and I think they could be a couple of years away again. So we'll see. We'll get into that, but want to start off first of all. Let's talk about the Alan Lazard thing, Scott. Of course, that bounced around Twitter today because the Pittsburgh Steelers made a deal, sending the immensely talented but also, I don't know if you want to say diva, locker room problem, whatever you may say.
Yeah, yeah,
George Pickens, the wide receiver, the kid out of Georgia, who is a phenomenal talent. There is no denying his ability as a receiver. If he goes to a place where he sees enough targets, he's going to be one of the most productive receivers in the NFL, if you ask me. However, pulls a lot of stuff that Mike Tomlin doesn't like. I don't know if you saw this, or for those of you who saw it, what was it at the end of the season? I think it was a final presser of the year. And he's meeting with the media, and they're like, "Oh, are you excited about the future?" And he was I think they specifically said, "Are you excited about the future of the offense?" And he was like, "No," and just walked away. Like, wow, like that's wow. So I thought there, like, I don't think this guy's going to be around. So he gets shipped to the Dallas Cowboys for a couple of draft picks, and now that leaves a hole in Pittsburgh, where of course many expect Aaron Rodgers to land. So once Pittsburgh makes that deal, people start to speculate. That opens up wide receiver 2 for them. Alan Lazard is now a tradable asset for the Jets. Should they make a move there? Lazard sends some cryptic tweets. What are your thoughts there, Scott? Would you deal him? What could you expect to get realistically in trade? And, I haven't mentioned it yet, but of course, Gabe Davis, former Buffalo Bill, was let go by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Me personally, I deal Lazard and sign Davis. What are your thoughts, Scott?
I would be open to dealing Lazard. I think if you deal Lazard, you can't be like, all right, maybe we'll sign Davis. If you deal Lazard, you have to sign Davis, in my opinion, because the wide receiver room is already thin outside of Garrett Wilson. You hope you have Malachi Corley have a breakout year, which fingers crossed could happen, maybe, hopefully. The Smith guy who we got in the draft, who his speed is lethal. He just needs to catch better. But once again, he can be another game changer should he develop the correct way. But I guess my thing is, if you did deal Lazard, you have to make sure that you are going to get Davis, or you are going to get somebody else, because you can't deal Lazard and then be like, oh, well, Davis signs with I don't know, another team who needs a wide receiver like the next day. So I would be 100% open to dealing Lazard. He's coming off his best year as a Jet, which isn't saying much because the year prior was terrible. But I would say now is the time to deal him. Just you got to make sure you got someone to fill those shoes, because even though he's not great, I think I would take him over a couple people who are in the locker room right now.
Yeah, that's the problem. As much as we, and I said I would like to see Lazard go, but there aren't a lot of guys on the roster who were proven ahead of him. Um, Comment here in the chat from Secret Squirrel. We'll touch on this real quick. Off season is for talking heads. Winning games counts. I expect us to win at least 9 games. Honestly, I mean, listen, to each his own. Anything's possible and all that. I can't get there. I can't say there's a 9-win team right now. They won 5 last year and they got worse at a lot of positions. I think, again, Justin Fields versus Aaron Rodgers. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I can see where you could make the case that because of the offense they plan on running, Justin Fields could be more efficient, more effective if they want to go with a 300-headed monster and run the hell out of the ball, including the quarterback. However, that being said, you got worse at wide receiver. You're going from Devontae Adams as wide receiver 2, or 1 on some weeks, depending on the week, to either Alan Lazard or possibly, who knows, Gabe Davis, whatever. But that's a significant downgrade there. I talked last week. I get that, everyone's excited about Taylor stepping in to step in and take over at tight end after being taken with the 42nd pick. I think he's going to be a good one. However, I think as a rookie, like rookie tight ends sometimes take a while to pop. So I think a veteran, I think the tight end they had last year in Conklin as a veteran was a better player than Taylor will be in year 1. Now by year 2, 3, 4, I expect Taylor to be the better player. But as a rookie, as Taylor's learning the ropes, he's not going to be on Conklin's level. Now look, he may produce as well because Conklin just didn't get targets. I'm just talking about who is the better football player, and I will say veteran Conklin better than Taylor. You have a significant downgrade at corner where you went from Reed to Stevens. Now I understand you added Azariah Thomas, who at some point may take over if Stevens plays as poorly as he did in Baltimore, but that's a downgrade there. So that's a downgrade at CB2, which is huge. A downgrade at wide receiver 2, which is huge. A downgrade at tight end. Now you can say we upgraded at right tackle if Membu works out as you hope he does. That's possible, and I get that. I'm not saying they got worse in every single spot. They just, to me, got worse in too many spots. And even saying Fields could be a more efficient quarterback based on the offense they're going to run, he's still not a better thrower of the football than Aaron Rodgers, especially as Rodgers, at least in my opinion, improved later in the season. So I don't know, and I'm not going to even predict a win total, but do you think this team is going to be about what they were last year, Scott, or do you see them making or having a chance at making a significant leap to being a team that, I mean, 9 wins does what? It puts you in playoff contention. Do you think this is a team that's ready to compete for a playoff spot?
I hope so. I don't look as a Jets fan. I mean, I remember when Aaron Rodgers came. I'm like, we're gonna make the playoffs finally. Tore his Achilles on the 4th play of the season. The following season, oh yeah, he's back. He's healthy. We're gonna make the playoffs. No. So obviously, I'm very cautiously optimistic. We did downgrade. I'm worried about the receiver spot the most, truthfully. I think that Garrett Wilson is going to be obviously is the receiver 1 here. There's nobody that the Jets are going to get or sign that's going to even come close to taking that spot away from him. But I think that, you just got to – there's a lot of question marks because I'll be honest with you right now, Glenn, my hot take for this season, which I've been vocal about and I don't shy away from it. I might be wrong. I think Taylor is going to be one of the most productive Jets on offense. One of the most catches. I don't know. I have a lot of high hopes in this guy. If they could get him going, if they could get Fields going, there is a chance, but it just, there's so many question marks, like the corner situation, the receiver situation. It would be amazing to see Malachi Corley come in. And I know I said his name once already, but to me, he really is a big piece of this Jets offense because, I mean, he's looking now like wide receiver 3. Or, I mean, maybe even 2, depending on who comes in and depending on how they play. And if he has a breakout year, that could be amazing for the Jets. And that could be amazing in getting them into the playoffs and finally ending that playoff drought. But it's a big question. It's a big question mark for sure.
It really is, Scott. And the thing is with Corley and with anybody else who played under this coaching staff over the past few years, the lack of effort toward developing him was shocking. I mean, even when you got to the point, it didn't take very long because it often doesn't with the Jets. It didn't take very long before you knew this team was out of the playoff hunt. And so you're thinking at that point, you've got a wide receiver that this organization gushed about and bragged about and released their private texts to the media to show them this guy was our no matter what pick. We had to have him. We loved him that much. Season's over and we're not going to play him. And I get he had the boneheaded fumble, which was about as dumb a play as you can make on a football field. I'm not defending that. But the fact that you just didn't make any effort at all, I mean, I look at these things and I'm like, could he really have been that bad in practice? That you were doing backflips over drafting this guy and your season is over and he can't buy a target? Like and listen, you hear stories, right? In years past, I've heard general man, and I'm not saying this is the case with Malachi Corley, but I certainly had the thought, and this thought again, based on how the Jets treated him, or I should say based on the Jets' lack of willingness to put him on the field. You hear general managers say sometimes, they never give a name, but I've heard GMs asked before, did you ever draft a guy and know right away that you made a mistake? And I've heard GMs say, day one of practice. Like, we drafted a guy, season started, I went out there and watched him day one and said, how did we end up with this guy? And again, I'm not saying that. I think Corley can play. I love them. I said before the draft, my dream draft was Brock Bowers at 11 and then Corley after that. And give me two guys who can chew up yards after the catch and beat up defenses. I love the Corley pick. I'm not knocking the pick. That thought did pop into my head. Like, is this a guy that they've already given up on? Because they certainly acted like it. So can this regime, now again, you would imagine Aaron Glenn, the old school toughness mentality, you would think he would love a guy like Corley. And especially if Tanner Extran is going to be anywhere near creative as that offense was in Detroit, you would think he would want as many guys as possible who can do as many things as possible. And Corley gives you a dimension that not a lot of guys add, that physicality, that sort of fullback physicality at receiver. So you would imagine they would find some use for him. And he is absolutely an X factor, because if he's anywhere near as good as many of us thought he could be, that's another really important weapon in your arsenal. But the fact they didn't play him, I mean, how surprising was that to you to see this team, seeing their season crumble and fade away, and Malachi Corley is just an afterthought, not even active most weeks?
I don't want to point fingers, obviously, but I do sometimes wonder how much of that was Rodgers playing buddy ball, which we heard about.
Yeah.
We saw that in the headlines a whole bunch with Devontae Adams. We saw Garrett Wilson feel a certain type of way in a lot of the press or the post-game press conferences when they would talk to him in the locker room. And maybe that did kind of affect it. So maybe we will kind of see a resurgence of Corley this year. I personally think that if Corley, I mean, I don't want to put this pressure on Corley, but I personally think Corley can make or break this team. I think that if Corley is a very good wide receiver too, because he won't be the wide receiver one. Right. Wilson's holding that spot. But if you could get Corley to wide receiver two, that's amazing. That's like the best thing that we could ask for. It's just a matter of actually.
That would be huge. Yeah. And Jets Worldwide says in the chat, have you ever worked for someone who didn't motivate you or believe in you? And I'm not going to disagree with that, Jets Worldwide. My only contention with that is that because I say all the time, I've talked about how the defense fell apart when Robert Saleh left, and I think a big part of that was their guy. And firing him was so demoralizing that they kind of, I don't want to say mailed it in, but I don't think their hearts were in it for a little while. And then the season fell apart and it just never came back. Because those first few games, even though they weren't winning, they were playing well. The defense was, at least going off the top of my head. I don't feel like they were giving up a ton of points. The thing with Corley, though, to me, why I don't think it would apply or should apply. When you're a rookie, like trying to establish yourself, you shouldn't need extra motivation. You shouldn't need, it's not like he's a 10-year vet who's been here for 4 years of losing and things aren't getting better and he's getting fed up. Like, this is welcome to the NFL. Let's see what you got. There's no room for like, oh, well, I'm not happy here after the first 5 weeks. So I don't think he put in the work and the time and been through quite the suffering that a lot of fans had. Here, Wild Wave, let's see. Wild Wave said Rodgers didn't want Corley on the field, which, listen, that could be. Rodgers was the shot caller. There's no doubt. If he didn't want him on the field, he wouldn't have had him there. And I guess it's possible. The only reason it would have surprised me, they share an agent. So I would have thought even if Rodgers didn't want him out there, the agent would have been like, look, man, like just get this guy a couple catches a week, get him on the field, throw him a couple bubble screens, let him make a play. But again, maybe not. I don't know if an agent is willing to overstep that bound when you're talking about a legend like Aaron Rodgers, who doesn't really do too well with people telling him what to do. Thomas says Corley had the idiotic fumble. I did. I touched on that, Thomas, when we started discussing this, that it was terrible. And yeah, there was no accountability. I think the worst part of that was after the game, Corley said he didn't feel bad about it. It's like, oh my God, like you just made it 10 times worse. It's bad enough you had that play. So let's see. When Jets management made him accountable and benched him, people were still complaining. That's all Jets fans know how to do best is complain. Listen, we do complain a lot, but unfortunately, the Jets do give us a lot to complain about. And I'm not convinced that was a turning point. Like, even if you were upset about that as a team, you don't sit him for the rest of the year. You want to sit him for a week or two, fine, but he just never really saw the field again. Wild Wave says DJ Reed's a perfect example of mailing it in. Look at his numbers week by week. Yeah, look, DJ Reed, and I say all the time, right? PFF grades aren't everything, but look at his PFF grades the weeks before Saleh was fired and then after. And he definitely didn't look like the same player. But again, and here's what I mean where I'll defend it a little bit. These guys are human beings, and I talked about this a week or two ago. This is 2 solid years of hype and pump, and we got a quarterback now. We got a shot to win it all. We're a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Aaron Rodgers walks in, says that Lombardi looks lonely. Let's get another one. 8 teams have a chance to win a Super Bowl every year. We're one of them. And then he blows out the Achilles, and then he comes back, and you start out 2-3, and the head coach gets fired. Like, that's got to be so deflating and demoralizing. I can't blame a guy for just throwing his hands up and being like, you know what, man, this I want to get the hell out of here, which is clearly what Reed wanted. And he did, yeah. So, and Jets Worldwide said he's referring to the drop ball before the end zone. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. He never really played before. I think he had 1 or 2 catches before he dropped that end around, and then never really saw the field again. So, just not a great move by him, but I don't think you sit a guy for the rest of the year. But getting back on track, want to talk a little bit about guys who are on the roster. Now, of course, Corley wasn't a day 3 guy, but look at some day 3 guys over the past few years who were drafted by the previous regime, who are still on the roster. Now, granted, it's a 90-man roster. Obviously, you can keep some guys around. You can keep a ton of guys around who won't be around beyond that, or who won't be around once the season comes because you're trimming down to 53. But, like Michael Clemens is a good example. I've had a few people comment, say, why is this guy still on the team? And I'm like, well, fair question, because you don't expect him to be there when the season starts. But then it's like, well, do they have a different role in mind for him because he was bad at edge? Like, do they see him as a guy? A couple of years ago, they talked about we're going to have him add weight and play DT. And he added weight, but he didn't really play a whole lot of DT. So it's a matter of, will he be around? I don't know. But there are a handful of players who were drafted on the 3rd day of the draft over the last few years who have not seen much of the field. And I would love to know, as an outsider, I would love to be a fly on the wall and to hear what this coaching staff is saying about these guys. So I'll throw out the names. These are guys drafted over the last 3-4 years on day 3 and who are still around. And some names more familiar than others. Some guys, we've seen a lot of them, but they haven't really produced. Starting with Michael Clemens, obviously the defensive end out of Texas A&M. You've also got Max Mitchell, You've got Jeremy Ruckert. Well, we'll include Ruckert. He's not a day 3 guy. He's a round 3 guy. Then prior to that, you've got tight end Zach Kuntz out of Old Dominion, Jarek Bernard-Converse, the corner out of LSU and K-State, Zaire Barnes, the linebacker out of Western Michigan, Izzy Abanikanda, my guy, gone, no longer with the club, Carter Warren, the tackle out of Pitt. Jalen Key is gone. He is a Bengal. Quantez Stiggers, the corner out of Canada, and Isaiah Davis, running back, of course, out of South Dakota State, who we saw a fair bit of last year. Jordan Travis retired, no longer a New York Jet. And Braylon Allen, the running back out of Wisconsin, which I think we will see quite a bit of. But when you think of those names, as those names go through your head, is there anyone on that list, Scott, who maybe not everybody's talking about, isn't a popular pick to hang around for a very long time? Who do you think on that list is a guy that you look at and say, I think there's still something there that we haven't seen yet, and he can, become a better player now than we believe, or a better player later than we believe he is now?
Well, all right, so I'll start off with saying this. I feel kind of bad for Zach Kuntz, I'm not going to lie, because he was built as this athletic freak in college. He was very talented in college. We saw a lot of what he could do. Aaron Rodgers was very high on him, but he's someone who I just don't see panning out here, because obviously the Jets went and got Taylor, who I think Taylor gets a majority of the reps at tight end this year. I don't think that there's much competition there. Ruckert's the feel-good story that we all hope. But, no, not really. I think Taylor gets the majority of those reps. But honestly, if we're talking about who has the biggest year, I would say we'd look at the running backs for the day 3 picks in the past, because Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, we saw what they could do a little bit. And it begs the question that, what happens with Breece Hall, because he is entering his final year of the contract. I think this year, well, actually, you know what? I take that back, because I'm pretty sure they just got him for the 5th year anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, because there was a lot of news that came out with the Garrett Wilson. And I know they got Jermaine Johnson too. I want to say they got Breece Hall again.
Well, they'll have. Well, Breece is. He wasn't a first rounder, so they don't have a 5th-year option with him.
Okay.
He was a second rounder, so he'll be around, but there's no 5th-year option on him.
Okay, so yeah. Point is, though, I think Breece, look, I don't want to say it, but if Allen and Davis have a great year again this year, maybe you are looking at making Braylon Allen the RB1, Isaiah Davis RB2, and maybe getting some picks for Breece. And I'm not on board on trading Breece yet, but anything's possible with this new regime. We don't know how they're going to run things. We don't know who's going to be their guys. We can assume, Breece is the starting running back. And I think that'll definitely be the case to start the year. But what happens if, he doesn't perform? He has some down games like he did last year. Will Braylon Allen get a look, and will he take off as well? So there's a lot of question marks for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the things that could impact the running back room, in regards to Breece, if this team, if they're not a whole lot better than they were last year, and if they're not pushing for a playoff spot, as some folks think they might, I think guys like Breece, if you haven't traded Lazard by that point, I think these guys become trade chips as the trade deadline approaches, especially if Breece is having a big year. This is why when the draft rolled around and there was the rumors about Breece, I kind of thought, I don't want to deal him now. If they do, I get it, but I'd rather hang on to him, because I think that his value is much lower than it would be if you interject him into the offense this year with a much improved offensive line. I say much improved. Okay, they only added one player, but really Olu at left tackle wasn't there for much of the year. So I feel like you've gotten significantly better at left tackle, because Tyron Smith was a disaster last season. And Membu should be. Jesus, if Membu's not an upgrade over Max Mitchell and everyone else they had at right tackle last year, that's a little bit concerning. But with the better tackle play, I expect the running backs to be better. And if Breece is having a big year and you're out of the playoff hunt and the trade deadline's coming and someone comes and offers you a 3 or a 4 for Breece, I think you pull the trigger. Same goes for Lazard. You're not going to get a 3 or a 4, but you might get a wide receiver needy team. It could even happen in camp where a team says, all right, look, instead of, maybe you would have gotten a 7 or a 6 before preseason, but now we're desperate. We'll give you a 5. That could become a 4 if he scores 8 touchdowns or something along those lines. So you can wait. Basically, you're holding none of the cards right now if you're trying to deal a guy like Brees. I mean, Lazard's value is unlikely to go up. He is what he is. Brees still has some untapped potential and the ability to do some things he has. And Donovan Edwards is an X factor. You bring in the undrafted rookie from Michigan, who 3 years ago, was one of the best running backs in the country and viewed as a guy who would be. I mean, nobody. If you would have said 3 years ago that Donovan Edwards, who was averaging over 7 yards a carry in a very tough conference, if you would have told somebody he's going to go undrafted, you wouldn't have believed it. But here he is, undrafted player who could emerge, and I think that's what makes for an interesting training camp battle. That'll be another conversation as camp gets closer. But I think this regime didn't draft Isaiah Davis. And I like Davis. I liked what he showed last year. I guess I look at Edwards and I'm like, man, can he make the roster? Because he's got a ton of talent. So what would have to happen for him to make the roster? I mean, it's a team could, but it's rare that you carry 4 backs. So we'll see what they do there. But as far as some of the other day 3 guys, Michael Clemens, I mentioned, I think he's a guy who gets moved along. I think Max Mitchell is a guy. If I'm the Jets, before I let go of Max Mitchell, I give him a look at guard. I think he might be able to play there a little bit, and you get some value there, and you get a guy who can be a backup spot starter at guard. Ruckert, again, not a day 3 guy, but I do want to discuss him because I think he has a chance. We've talked about, of course, he's got the history with Fields, which should help him, the familiarity there, that comfort level that they'll have that I don't think Rodgers ever had that with him. And I think Aaron Glenn is a guy who, if he's anything like Bill Parcells, it's not that Parcells never played rookies, but Parcells didn't love playing rookies. And he would bench first rounders. He would make a guy wait 8, 10, 12, maybe a full year, 12 games, whatever, before he'd really give him a shot. I'm not saying Aaron Glenn is the same way, but I can see even if Taylor is your tight end 1, which I expect he will be, Rucker can be your tight end 2 in today's NFL. Again, depending on what type of offense Engstrand runs. Even if Rucker just becomes I'm not saying he's got to have a 700, 800, 900 yard season to be effective. If Rucker can give you 350, 400 yards as your second tight end, score a couple touchdowns, to me, as a day 3 pick, that's a hit, or even a round 3 pick. That's not elite. It's not high level production you would like, but it's certainly not nothing. It's good enough to keep a guy around. And as you said, feel good story. You hope he hangs around for a while, being, season ticket holder and a fan and all that. Kuntz is the interesting one. 6'8", athletic freak. I'm not going to lie. I got a little bit excited in the offseason last year when Aaron Rodgers talked about how he was developing some chemistry with Kuntz while he was rehabbing and working the scout team. And I'm thinking, man, could they have something here? Could they have a dude this big, even if he's like a red zone target that you're working in certain situations? Didn't happen. Didn't come to fruition. Never saw the field. And the thing the thing that gives me, I don't know if hope is the right word. I don't know if optimism is the right word. But the thing that allows me to not give up on these guys is how bad the previous staff was. And I just think this staff, please, football gods, for the life of me, like, this staff can't be worse than the last one. These guys have to be better than the last staff. Not across the board. There will be some questions. I've mentioned those. You have a lot of. It's weird the way this staff was constructed, in my mind. And I'll go into this more, sometime in the future. And I've talked about it briefly, but I've mentioned, you've got a running backs coach coaching the quarterbacks. You've got a tight end coach coaching the O-line. You've got an O-line coach coaching the tight ends. A lot of crossover, and that stuff sometimes works out, but expecting it to work out at that many spots, I don't know what the odds are of that exactly. Zaire Barnes, I thought he was a guy who might have a shot because, I think he's listed. I'm not sure where the Jets list him now. I thought he was sort of touching on the 230s in terms of his weight. Jets list him at 227, which again isn't huge, but the Jets, a lot of their backers are smaller than the guys that Aaron Glenn used in Detroit. Carter Warren, the tackle, a lot of people gave up on him before he saw the field. But let's be honest. I liked him. I'm not. He hasn't been good. But do they now have an O-line coach who can develop a guy? Again, you've taken a tight end coach and moved him to O-line. We'll see how that works out. But I thought Warren was good enough to at least be a backup tackle, which as a 4th-round pick, you can live with that. But any of those guys, any of those names I mentioned make you think, yeah, I think that guy can stick? Or is it all just a bunch of 1,000,000-to-1 long shots who will need to show more than they've ever shown to hang around?
I think Bernard Converse is interesting. I think because, well, he's also a he's given a good spot right now because of how thin the Jets are at cornerback too. You know, with DJ Reed gone, I think that Converse is gonna be competing at minimum for the cornerback 2 spot. Because I mean, let's face it, I know they have Stevens, but I mean, look, he played not the best in Baltimore. I don't put too much stock in Stevens. I don't have too much faith in Stevens, and I think truthfully, before the end of the year, I think that we're going to see someone like Bernard Converse get their shot on the field in the cornerback 2 spot. Because let's face it, barring anything unforeseen, Sauce has cornerback 1 on lock. Cornerback 2 to me is wide open. I mean, yes, people say Stevens because he's the vet, he has the most experience, but I mean, all you got to do is look at his last season with Baltimore. He had just not a great year. Just to put it nicely, not a great year. To put it meanly, he was terrible. You know,
Yeah, He was a guy that offenses picked on regularly. Look, the signing confused me at the time. It confuses me now.
Yeah.
I've heard people say, well, maybe the move is to put him at safety. He played there as a rookie. Yeah, he was bad there too. He allowed, I believe, I looked it up the other day. He allowed 78% completion percentage as a safety. So he was worse than even worse at corner. I know you're covering more ground out there, and there's a lot more responsibility, or there can be a lot more responsibility. But Bernard Converse is a good one because he's got some versatility. He's played safety and corner in college. The Jets started him at safety, not started on the field. They started working with him as a safety, but it eventually moved him back to corner, where I thought, and I said this a few times last preseason, I thought he was the most improved player on defense, like from what we saw in the preseason from the year before. He kind of reminded me of the previous year's Jamie and Sherwood, where you could see from the previous year to that year, much different player, much better player. I thought Bernard Converse had an excellent preseason last year, and I've said it a couple times. I thought the best move this past offseason would have been retain Eccles and then let Eccles, Stiggers, and JBC compete for that cornerback 2 spot. Instead, they go out and give Stevens $12 million a year, which to me says the job is his to lose. But I think that's what's going to happen. I think Stevens starts the year as your cornerback 2. And I think at some point, Azariah Thomas, maybe JBC, but I think Azariah Thomas as the, top 100 pick of this regime, 72nd overall, whatever it was. And again, he's got the length, the size, he's got the stuff that Aaron Glenn wants. I think he's the most likely guy to unseat Stevens, but Bernard Converse is a guy right up there too. Stiggers, I don't know what to make of him. We've seen so little of him, so little. Because of the fact, not just a rookie who barely played, he's a rookie out of Canada who barely played, and he's got 1 year of experience in Canada. I mean, really an unbelievable story. Nobody really, I don't remember anybody knocking that pick when it was made. Everyone sort of thought across the board, this is the Jets may have gotten a steal here because here's a guy who, despite very little experience at the pro level, CFL or it was any level, I don't care, any the CFL isn't the NFL, but if you're playing there after only a handful of games in a fan-controlled league and you win Defensive Rookie of the Year, like there's something there to work with. And that's what the Jets saw, and that's why they brought him on, or they brought him in. But now you've got a couple of guys. You've got Stiggers, you've got Bernard Converse, who are very inexperienced. And another guy I want to mention, and look, we don't know a lot about him. I'd actually forgotten, because of the fact that he just didn't see the field in year one, but a guy who I liked a lot when the Jets added him as a UDFA last year, and he's still around, and that's Marcus Riley, the kid out of Florida A&M. He looked like a guy, and if I'm not mistaken, don't hold me to this, and I won't even say biggest. I was going to say, but the Jets gave him a fairly decent signing bonus last year to bring him in. I think he was the guy that reportedly the most teams were after. Like the Jets were competing with 3 or 4 other teams to sign Marcus Riley, the wide receiver out of A&M. They gave him a decent chunk of change. Didn't see the field obviously last year. I don't think there was a plan for him to see the field, and he's still on the roster. So this previous regime, with a chance to go through free agency and bring guys in, and I'll say all this, and they'll cut him as soon as we go off the air, and I'll look like a damn idiot for bringing him up. And again, I'm making no predictions. I'm just throwing his name out there as someone, as you've mentioned, Scott, the wide receiver depth is not all that good. So guys are going to have an opportunity to make this roster. But speaking of guys trying to make a roster, and, we've talked a little bit about some of the draft picks. UDFA-wise, this is a guy I've talked about a fair bit. I will talk about again tomorrow night. We've got Emery Hunt from CBS Sports coming on again. He came on pre-draft, said he'd come on post-draft, kept his word. Brady Cook, have you had a chance to watch him, the quarterback out of Mizzou? This was year 3 of me watching him. Been a big fan for a couple years now. Really liked his receivers at Mizzou. So I started watching him and then came away big Brady Cook fan. I think Theo Wee's a good receiver. I think Luther Burden's a good receiver. And at some point you realize who's the guy delivering the ball because he's doing a really good job too. And it's Brady Cook. And you see the mobility and you see the guts and you see the accuracy. Doesn't have a cannon of an arm, but he's got a good enough arm. Have you watched him at this point? And what are your thoughts on him?
I like him. I think I am a little messed up from the trauma as a Jets fan with quarterbacks, especially right out of college, because, we saw Zach Wilson, we saw Sam Darnold, we saw Geno Smith.
Everybody.
Literally
everyone.
And, I mean, look, the list goes on, but the fact is they got to get it right one time, right? And I like Brady Cook a lot, because, like you said, he doesn't have a cannon of an arm. He's not going to chuck it down the field, but I mean, look at Rodgers last year. I mean, maybe Rodgers had one. I'm not a walking encyclopedia. I don't know this, but I mean, I don't know how many passes Rodgers had over 20, 30, 40 yards last year, if any at all. Like, I know Devontae Adams caught a long pass. I know people have caught long passes and broke for a lot of yards, but man, Rodgers threw a lot of dumb passes. So, I mean, the dump passes are just as good sometimes as the bombs. So, I do like Brady Cook, though. I do think Brady Cook can be something here. I think he's worth a shot. I think he's worth a backup shot because, I mean, Tyrod Taylor is our backup now, and he's a backup. There's not much to say about him. He's just a backup.
I just the biggest thing to me with Tyrod Taylor is the health. Every time he's gotten on the field over the past 5-6 years, he gets injured. Couple things in the chat here. One from Jets Worldwide. Isn't Stevens rumored to be with the safety? Folks talked about that, but once you draft Malachi Moore and you sign Andre Sisco and you've got Tony Adams on the roster, I don't see where there's room for Stevens to move over to safety. And as I said, when he played safety in Baltimore, he was pretty terrible. The numbers were not good. He got beat for, I want to say, 4 touchdowns, allowed 70%, maybe at least 70% completion percentage. So it was ugly. It was ugly when he was there, and they've added 2 guys, and they've got one in place, so I'd be surprised if they did that. As far as Miller, Pritchett, and Skinner at wide receiver, I said the other day Dymere Miller is the guy who I'd watched the least of, but literally I think within a couple of hours of recording that episode, that was near the top of my list, so I went and watched a couple more of his games. So Miller and Pritchett worldwide, listen, explosive, quick guys who can make plays after the catch, ball in their hands. If you could get them in space, and again, you think of that Detroit offense under Ben Johnson and how good he was at creating mismatches and getting guys in. I mean, look, Jared Goff's completing 85% of his passes because he's got guys running open all over the field. Guys like Miller and Pritchett with their run after the catch ability, with their stop and go, high end speed, they would be guys who could, it wouldn't shock me if they make the roster. Again, keeping in mind, not a lot of depth at receiver. You've got a lot of names, but not a lot of guys who have done much. And as far as Quentin Skinner, I'm more familiar with him than any of the 3 because I've watched a ton of Kansas over the past few years. And he's a guy, look, he's 6'5". He is an absolute monster in terms of height and being able to out-jump guys high point the football, long limbed, and just a big play guy down the field. He averaged, I want to say it was 19.2 or 20.2 yards per catch a couple of years ago for Kansas. So with a team, especially if you move on from Lazard, for a team that doesn't have a guy with that type of size in the huddle, who could be a weapon down the field in the red zone, stuff like that. I like Skinner's chances. I like his chances, but again, I say that not knowing what Engstrand's going to run on offense. He's also, I mean, I know he's a more than willing blocker, which they're going to be looking for. I expect this team to run the ball an absolute ton. So Skinner could be a guy who is used at, or who, I'm sorry, a guy who helps himself in that capacity in terms of what coaches are looking for and whether or not a guy makes a team. So Miller and Pritchett are more of the run after the catch, big play guys who can just have elite speed. And then Skinner is a guy whose size, length, and ability to catch the ball down the field, contested catch rate. He's one of those guys you say, 50-50 ball to him is an 80-20 ball. So I like his chances to make it. And again, especially if they do move on from Allen Lazard. So before we wrap up here, Scott, any other thoughts you want to throw out on either the draft class, any offseason moves, anything like that you want to touch on, or moves that may be coming, like any type of trades? I mean, I've looked at the DT list, Scott, in terms of, is there someone they can sign? There's nobody out there that inspires me as oh yeah, go get. I mean, people mention Quinn Jefferson, good player, but they need someone to stop the run. That's not his game. That as of right now is one of my biggest concerns with this team, their ability to stop the run. But anything you want to add before we wrap up?
As far as DT, as far as the DT position goes, I think you just got to pray for the best with the guys we have now. And because honestly, I was looking at the free agent list, and there's nobody who does anything. There's really nobody who does anything for me there. And you could go with some of the rookies, you could go with some young players. I think you just got to pray. You just got to hope that, the guys we have now are good. And obviously Quinnen Williams is great. And I'm not saying he's not. Jermaine Johnson, we're getting him back. He's the edge rusher. We're hoping he comes back to his normal form. Will McDonald, another great edge rusher. Once again, you're hoping he does good again. So, there's a lot of hope I noticed going into this season for sure. I think, especially at the defensive tackle, because like I said, there's nobody that we can sign now that's going to be like, oh, wow, this is awesome. Let's say they sign someone like Quinton, you're just going to be like, okay, cool. Hope he does good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
he's an older guy. I'd like to see them add some youth, some guys who are going to kind of develop alongside Quinnen Williams. But I think I think they've sort of moved on from there. I don't think, at least this offseason, I don't think that's really a possibility. So we'll see what they do. But, to me, the guys they brought in, Tufeli and Nadi, and these guys aren't run stoppers. And even, you look at some of the young DTs who you like, and they don't have run stoppers in that group. And that's what they have to go get. We have talked about, of course, the fact that they went out and, one of the undrafted free agents was Fatorma Malba, who they added out of West Virginia. Really like his game. Not a huge guy, but good athleticism, quickness, strong at the point of attack. He's probably, of all the UDFAs, I think he's got the best shot to make the roster because he is the best player, the best UDFA at the biggest position of need.
And as far as the receiver position goes, one more thing I want to add is Smith. I'm hesitant on him still. I'm not going to lie. He cannot catch, but his speed is game changing. Yeah. If you could get him to catch a ball, actually catch a ball, he's someone that could be a game changer for the Jets. It's because his speed is insane. It's just a matter of getting him to be able to catch those passes, to not make so many drops. And if they're able to do that, I think the Jets are in a good spot next year for sure.
Yeah, that's obvious. That's the hole in his game, and that's a big one. And a lot of people have been critical of that pick for that reason, especially pairing him with Lazard. But two guys who drop the football at the rate that they do is concerning to say the least. Before we wrap up, Thomas says was reading Lazard could be traded. We talked about that earlier. And Lazard was being cryptic. He tweeted out that what was it, that Wolf of Wall Street thing, the Leonardo DiCaprio, where he says like I'm staying or not going anywhere or something.
Yeah.
Listen, that guy, I don't know why he comments like and I'm not saying he shouldn't. He's allowed to comment. Fans don't want him here. And people are saying that in the replies. Like, dude, I want you off my football team. Why do you think fans are going to celebrate and rally that you're staying? But I think that's, as our good friend Scott Mason of Play Like a Jet pointed out, the Steelers are smart. So that could be a reason why they don't trade for Allen Lazard. I don't see Aaron Rodgers running the front office there the way he did with the Jets. But listen, if you dealt the guy, I guess it's not impossible, is what I'm saying. But I would be surprised if Lazard went to the Steelers, because I think they would rather go get Gabe Davis or But I guess the one thing, Scott, and I'll end with this: the one thing that makes Lazard to the Steelers more likely than not, despite him having his struggles, it's not just that Rodgers is comfortable with him. It's that we hear all the time about how Rodgers, the offense, the calls at the line, the audibles are so complex that like you really want another receiver in the room to be able to help everybody with that. So that's where he could be bringing value. So that is one thing Lazard brings that others don't. That I'm literally kind of having that thought as I'm sitting here saying, no, they're not going to make that deal. They're not going to. And I'm thinking to myself, if it's as tough as they say to digest this offense, I would imagine you want a dude in that huddle who can answer everybody's questions. And if anybody can do it, it's him. He's played with Rodgers the longest of all the guys they could possibly get. He's played with Rodgers the most recent of all the guys they can get. I see them saying, well, Rodgers played with this guy and this guy. And right, but none of them have played as many snaps with him as Lazard has. None of them have played with Rodgers as recently as Lazard has. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for hopping on, Scott, and helping us out this week. Really appreciate it. Maybe do this again sometime.
Yeah, definitely, it was a lot of fun, and I appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
And thanks to you for the work. Check out Scott's work at jetnation.com. Scott, myself, we've added some other writers recently. We're trying to keep that front page updated with the latest goings on. And that'll wrap this one up. I will be back again tomorrow night, myself, Emery Hunt, going a bit more in depth on this draft class. And especially, I know I've done the UDFAs, but you love to have Emery on because he's an encyclopedia of draft prospect knowledge, and also a co-member of the Brady Cook fan club with me. We talked about him a lot pre-draft before the Jets signed him. Now that he's a Jet, we'll dig a little deeper on that. So be sure to tune in tomorrow night. Myself, Emery Hunt. Have a good one, Jets fans. All right.
Cool.